Good afternoon, Saxons. I'm your librarian, Ms. Masters, and this is First Chapter Friday. April is National Poetry Month, so April's challenge is to read a novel in verse. That is, a novel written in poetry. Most of us aren't used to books in this style, so it can be challenging to read them at first, but totally worth it. Poetry is somehow more powerful than regular prose. Maybe because it uses fewer words to get its point across, so each of those words has to be the absolute best choice. If you can get the novel in verse that you want to read in audio format, I highly recommend that option. Poems, like plays or lyrics, are meant to be heard. Today's novel in verse is called Unbound, and it's by Anne E. Berg. It's historical fiction, and I'm going to start by reading the inside flap so we know what we're getting into. The day Grace is called from the slave cabins to work in the big house, Mama makes her promise to keep her eyes down. Uncle Jim cautions her to keep her thoughts tucked private in her mind, or they could bring a whole lot of trouble and pain. But the more Grace sees of the heartless master and hateful missus, the more a voice clamors in her head, asking how come white folks can own other people, sell them on the auction block, and separate families forever. When that voice escapes without warning, it sets off a terrible chain of events that prove Uncle Jim's words true. Suddenly, Grace and her family must run. Deep in a forbidding wilderness, they face deadly animals, paddy rollers, and the uncertainty of ever finding freedom. Unbound, a novel in verse by Anne E. Berg. Part 1. When Mama tells me I'm going to the big house, she makes me promise to always be good, to listen to the missus, never talk back, to lower my eyes and say, yes ma'am, no ma'am, and to not speak lest spoken to first. She tells me about the new dress I'm sure to get, and sweet muffins every morning, she says, pulling the thread from Thomas's old baby gown. I wind the limp thread round a stick, slow and careful, so not to break it. I like soft clothes and sweet muffins, but not if it means leaving Mama. Since I was little, Mama's been telling me, you keep those eyes looking up. That's where the good Lord and his angels live. So how come now she's changing her mind? Promise you'll keep your eyes down, she says. I promise. Promise you'll keep your mouth closed. I promise. Promise you won't talk back. Promise you'll keep your thoughts and questions about... And suddenly, like a clap of thunder in a sweet blue sky, all my promising starts feeling like a fistful of thorns is scratching my brain. I promise, and then crack! I drop to the dirt floor and crunch into a ball. I won't go, I say. I want to stay with you. Aunt Sarah stands in the cabin doorway. Willie's playing with the hem of her dress, and she's holding Thomas in her arms. Mama shoos him away and kneels down. She tugs me apart and takes me into her arms. I pull away. I won't go, I cry. I won't leave Uncle Jim and his night stories or the sound of his soft singing when he tends our moonlight garden. I won't go! I kick. I won't leave little Thomas and Willie. Aunt Sarah's old. She can sing 'em when Mama finds work in the fields, but who'll stand over 'em waving a dried leaf to give 'em a breeze when they nap? Who'll play with 'em and chase 'em into a lump of giggles when they wake? I won't go! I won't go! I pound and thrash, scream and stomp. I won't go! I want to stay with you! Mama wraps her arms tight round mine. My sweet baby child, she whispers. My sweet baby child. The wetness on her face mingles with my tears and tastes like blood. Uncle Jim says Mama's the prettiest mama in the country. Her arms and legs may be bony as kindlin', he says laughing, but she's got the softest eyes and the kindest heart. I wish I had soft brown eyes like Mama's, and skin what's dark and smooth like hers, instead of light blue eyes and pale skin. Well, Grace, you have my curls, Mama always says, kissing my hair. My baby's beautiful just the way she is. Mama tries to be cheery even when she's tired. Aunt Sarah says that's 'cause the good Lord put Mama on this earth to remind folks there's still goodness in the world. I agree, and Uncle Jim does too. Uncle Jim is Thomas and Willie's daddy. I don't have a daddy. Of course, Aunt Sarah says everybody's got a daddy. I just never laid eyes on mine. I never heard him sing or feeled him lifting me to the moon and laughing like Uncle Jim does with Willie and Thomas. It's my Aunt Sarah what's been helping Mama take care of me since I was a baby. She's not really my aunt, but Mama says the folks what love you, what hold you and soothe you, what worry about you, and make sure you's clothed and fed, Mama says these folks is your family. She says Uncle Jim's my daddy in all the ways what count. I only call him Uncle Jim because that's what I called him before he jumped the broom and married my mama. Mama says we got 2 days before I leave for the big house. Says it's no use stamping our feet or crying. Says there's things we can change and things we can't. You's only going up the hill, she says, smiling, but her voice quivers, and a sorrowing tear clings to her bottom lash. Up the hill don't seem far, but Master Allen lives up the hill, and if you cross Master Allen, he might send you away, like he sent away Uncle John. Uncle John was an old man what worked in the fields. Iron chains stretched across his feet so he couldn't hardly lift his legs. Mama told me Uncle John got caught running one too many times. Master Allen was tired of chasing him, so during the day he locked Uncle John's ankles in iron circles, and when nighttime came, he chained Uncle John to his bed. Only, you can't weed tobacco fields in iron chains, so finally Master Allen brought Uncle John to the auction block. Uncle Jim says the auction block's a putrid place, where folks is pulled and poked, prodded and paraded just like they's a prize heifer. You hear auction and you run, he says. Auction's nothing but weepin' mamas, whimpering children, and the callous voice what calls out numbers and makes commands. Lift that shirt, roll those pants. There's some words what make my bones shiver, and auction's one of 'em. How am I going to live in the master's house? What if I cross him, and he sends me to the auction block? Aunt Sarah must be worrying about this too, 'cause the next morning when the horn sounds and Mama and Uncle Jim leave for the fields, she tells me I got some listening to do before I start my chores. Aunt Sarah's shriveled and skinny as a dried tobacco leaf, but her voice snaps like fresh-cut pine knots what's thrown on the fire. Your mama don't want to scare you, she says, but don't be thinking times is soft in the big house. Don't be imagining fancy clothes and sweet muffins. Aunt Sarah's eyes flash. Master Allen'll be worrying about his tobacco, but the missus'll be watching you. Just watching and waiting for you to look cross-eyed or make a mistake. Aunt Sarah lowers her voice, and the flint in her eyes fades into thin, crusty slits. Don't know why, but the missus is hateful as a toad. Nobody wants to scare you, but you need to keep the promises you made to your mama. Aunt Sarah don't usually talk so much lest she's telling me I don't do enough to help Mama, so I know she's meaning what she says. I'll keep my promises, I say. Aunt Sarah smiles sadly, brushing her rough, gnarly fingers against my face. I wish I could run away. Willie wakes up, starts poking Thomas, and before long they's chasing, crawling, and climbing like baby squirrels. While Aunt Sarah gives the boys breakfast, a scantlin of cornmeal and molasses, I finish rolling the beds and sweeping out the spiders and cinch bugs, what got lost looking for a place to stay. Me and Willie go outside and I set him looking for leaf hoppers while I weed the garden. Aunt Sarah sits on her chair, mending whatever her naughty fingers can still mend. This little one needs peace, she says. Sometimes our Willie's just too wild. The midday horn sounds. I'm happy folks in the field is finally stopping to eat, but time is passing too quick. My mind's going to break, trying to figure out a way to stay with Mama. When the garden's nothing but hills and sprouts with not a single weed, Willie climbs on my back like always. We run and bounce till there's no more breath left inside me. Willie's still squealing, more, more! But I put him down and he starts pulling his ear and whining, so I know it's nap time. Aunt Sarah gives the boys a bit more cornmeal, and this time we have some too. I put the boys to rest on they lumpy rags, and Thomas falls right asleep. But even with my best fannin' and sweetest singing, it takes a long while for Willie to settle. By the time he does, Aunt Sarah's got her eyes closed too. I rinse our bowls in the wash bucket and make some mud to patch the holes in the wall what make ghosty sounds when we's trying to sleep. When I finish piling wood for the night's cooking fire, the boys wake. We go outside to play a hiding game, except Willie don't know how to hide, and Thomas cries when I disappear behind the cabin. I take him in my arms, and we sit on the ground rocking. Willie rests his head on my back, and a sadness what's heavier than a bucket of rainwater settles inside me. Who's going to chase away the ghosty winds that blow through cracked walls? Who's going to give horsey rides and play our hiding games? Aunt Sarah calls to us. We cook our corn cakes in the fire, brush off the ashes, and have our supper. My heart feels like it's going to break in two. If you're intrigued by this taste of Unbound, you can order the print version for pickup on the library's website. I also just got us the audio version, so you should see that on the Sora app or soraapp.com very shortly. Thanks for joining me for First Chapter Friday, and have a great spring break!